Hello, welcome back CBS Beyond the Gates spoilers. The storm over Fairmont Crest didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It arrived in a meeting scheduled to neatly in a private office locked with deliberate care, and in a coldness so sharp it made every breath feel like evidence. Vernon had been waiting for this moment longer than anyone realized. He was never the kind of man who struck in anger. He struck when he had measured every consequence, when he had found the smallest fractures in a system that looked unbreakable. And when he decided that one more act of tolerance would be enough to bring the entire structure family reputation. Carefully maintained agreements crashing down like a building with its foundation removed. So the warning he intended for Andre was never going to be a simple reprimand. It was a declaration that Vernon's patience had ended, and that anything tied to Bill and the unresolved tensions of the past would no longer be allowed to sleep beneath layers of strategic silence. Andre walked into the summons with a clear instinct that this was not an ordinary conversation. In the rhythm of his heartbeat, he sensed a particular kind of quiet, the quiet of someone who had gathered enough facts and was now waiting for a single answer to decide whether to spare or destroy. Andre was not naive. He knew Vernon never called anyone into a sealed room without a reason. And he knew that Bill's name, even if it didn't appear on any schedule, was the invisible cord that could tighten around every relationship in this family. The tensions from the past were not harmless history. They were an old wound that had never fully healed, only wrapped in bandages made of power, honor, and carefully curated denial. Andre had lived long enough inside corridors of influence to understand that the most dangerous thing wasn't a secret itself, but the moment the person holding it decided to stop protecting it. Vernon didn't waste time on ceremony. There was no warm-up, no slow circling that might give Andre room to explain himself. That alone revealed Vernon's position. He was done testing, done probing. He looked at Andre the way a man looks at a problem he intends to solve, not a person he intends to understand. The air in the room seemed to thicken, turning Andre's movements slower, as if he were stepping through deep water. Vernon confirmed that his warning would be severe, and in that instant Andre understood it wasn't the kind of warning that meant don't do it again. It was the kind that meant this is your last chance. That warning was explicitly connected to Bill and to tensions left unresolved for far too long, which meant every escape route built on excuses was already sealed. If Bill was at the center of this, Vernon would not allow Andre to pretend he was separate from the fallout. The past between Andre and Bill, no matter how deeply Andre believed he had buried it, was being dragged up like a chain and laid on the table, cold and undeniable, reminding him that some connections cannot be cut with logic, only with damage. Andre listened, but he was also speaking to himself internally because he had to assess the speed of the situation the way a chess player reads a board. What unsettled him wasn't only the warning, it was the certainty with which Vernon delivered it. Vernon didn't place words in the air. He locked them in position. Once the lock snapped shut, Andre would have no choices except the two paths Vernon had already drawn. Then the hard action arrived, not as an empty threat, but as a system prepared to move. Vernon issued a concrete ultimatum. If Andre didn't step away from questionable activities, or if he didn't keep his distance from Donnie, Vernon would immediately remove him from his current job. Not consider, not review, but immediately. That blunt finality sent a chill through Andre, because he understood the job wasn't merely a title. It was a pass into a powerful network, a shield, a platform for ambition, and a barrier between him and the past that could still swallow him whole. But the ultimatum didn't stop at employment. Vernon declared he would expose the evidence he had collected about Andre's past, evidence tied to Bill that could severely damage Andre's reputation and career. In this world, losing a job was a wound you might treat and recover from. Exposure was a sentence that could kill your future before you even realized you'd been condemned. Andre imagined the speed at which rumors spread, the way a name could be ripped out of the present and nailed to the ugliest version of its past, the way doors would shut without explanation. Alliances would dissolve, invitations would disappear. Vernon didn't need to describe the darkness in detail. The word evidence was enough to make Andre understand there was a real file, a real dossier, something that could dismantle him piece by piece. And what made it worse was the way Vernon spoke, as if he was ready to do it without hesitation. The next strike was even more brutal because it hit Donnie. Andre knew Donnie wasn't merely a personal attachment. Donnie was emotion, the complication that made every decision heavier. When Vernon demanded that Andre cut off all personal contact with Donnie immediately, Andre felt himself shoved across a line that was designed to break him. If it were only about power, Andre could calculate. But Donnie forced him to confront the one thing most likely to make him lose control. The truth that he wasn't just protecting a position, he was protecting something that still made him feel human. And in Vernon's world, being human was sometimes treated as a weakness, something to be exploited. Andre couldn't react openly. He understood that every pause, every flicker of expression could be read as confession. He also understood that Vernon hadn't come to hear defenses. He had come to force a choice and demand responsibility. Andre tried to hold his face steady, but inside him a war was raging. One part of him wanted to challenge the audacity of it, who had the right to dictate who he could love, who had the right to use employment as a weapon against intimacy. But another part, colder and sharper, reminded him that challenging Vernon now was the same as stepping into a trap Vernon had already built. Andre had survived as long as he had because he knew when to advance, when to retreat, and when to pretend compliance just long enough to buy time. But this ultimatum made even buying time dangerous, because Vernon had declared the timeline: immediate termination, immediate exposure, immediate ruin. There was no comfortable delay. Vernon pressed the point further. Andre must stop any illegal behavior immediately. That word illegal landed like a verdict. It was the kind of label that could transform Andre from an ambitious man into someone marked for elimination. Andre saw Vernon's deeper intent. If Andre wanted to keep his position and his protection, he had to cut off his own darker edges before Vernon cut them off with a blade. Yet Andre also knew that in this world, what was called shady was often simply gray strategy in a city where everyone played gray. What truly terrified him wasn't Vernon's judgment, it was Vernon's power to define Andre's actions in the first place. Once Vernon controlled the definition, Andre lost the right to explain. As Andre listened, he realized this wasn't only about protecting Donnie from him. It was also about protecting the family from repeating Bill's history. If unresolved tension tied to Bill still existed, it meant there was a fault line buried inside this family that Vernon had been holding together with ruthless control. Bill was the name that made people lose their balance, the symbol of a season of betrayal and collapse. Vernon might endure many things, but he would not endure history repeating itself. And in Vernon's eyes, Andre had become a dangerous link, someone who could drag Donnie toward chaos, someone who could pull the family back into the same spiral they had paid dearly to escape. So Vernon's warning was not merely targeted at Andre. It was Vernon locking the past behind a door, determined to keep it from bursting open. Andre stood between two fears. The first was losing power, losing his position, losing everything he had built so he would never have to kneel again. The second was losing Donnie, losing the fragile belief that something real still existed inside a life engineered by calculation. Andre understood exactly what Vernon was doing, placing both fears on the same scale to paralyze him. If Andre chose his job, he would cut Donnie out of his life like severing flesh, and he would also bow to Vernon, proving Vernon could control him through power alone. If Andre chose Donnie, he risked termination, exposure, ruin, and he might also drag Donnie down with him if those files were real and ready to explode. Both choices carried punishment. The cruelty was that Vernon demanded payment immediately, without time for Andre to prepare, to protect himself, to arrange a softer landing. Andre began to measure the situation with survival instincts. Reputation was armor, career was fortress. And the evidence Vernon claimed to possess was a bomb under the foundation. If Vernon truly held proof of Andre's past connected to Bill, then Andre wasn't only being threatened, he was being held hostage. Hostage to a man who would sacrifice an individual to preserve an empire. Andre also recognized the unspoken message. Vernon wouldn't issue an ultimatum unless he believed Andre had a weakness. That weakness could be Donnie, or it could be a truth Andre once believed he had buried. Either way, Vernon's grip was precise. For the first time, Andre felt himself forced to look directly at two versions of his own identity. Andre, the man of ambition who would step into darkness to win. And Andre, the man who still wanted to believe he could love, could choose what was right, could avoid becoming the worst version of himself. The inner conflict tightened around his throat, but he couldn't show it. Showing it meant losing. When Vernon repeated the consequences, termination if Andre refused, total destruction if the past was exposed, he spoke as if he were announcing routine procedure. Andre knew it was not routine. In their world, firing was not merely removal. It was a signal to everyone watching. Andre is no longer protected. Andre is no longer inside the circle. Andre is now vulnerable to rumors, rivals, and even former allies. Vernon understood that power. Vernon used it. And Andre, no matter how much he hated admitting it, understood that Vernon held absolute advantage. Total ruin was the phrase that distorted Andre's sense of the future. Total meant no return. Total meant no rebranding, no redemption arc, no accomplishment strong enough to outweigh the stain. Total meant Andre would be trapped inside a story someone else told about him, rather than the story he wanted to build. And Andre knew that once a story is told the wrong way, it can kill the person who is still alive inside it. So Andre faced the harshest choice, power or relationship. But it wasn't simply a comparison of benefits. It was a test of who Andre truly was. Could he endure loss without breaking? Could he retreat without becoming nothing? Could he live without looking at Donnie and feeling he had betrayed the only thing that ever felt honest? At the same time, could he dare to defy Vernon, knowing Vernon might truly drag the evidence into the light? Andre realized that no matter what he chose, he would lose a piece of himself. The only difference was which piece he sacrificed first. The tension in the room did not rise through volume but through weight, through the heaviness of every pause. Andre understood this private office wasn't only where Vernon issued an ultimatum. It was a courtroom, and the verdict depended on the defendant's reaction. Andre had to control every expression so Vernon couldn't tell which choice he was leaning toward. Because if Vernon sensed Andre was still clinging to Donnie, Vernon would tighten the pressure. If Vernon sensed resistance, Vernon might trigger the evidence like a self-destruct mechanism. Andre was walking a tightrope, and beneath it was the drop of a shattered name. Andre also understood that the decision ahead would determine the fate of more than just himself, even if those other names weren't spoken aloud. In their world, one misstep could shift alliances, break promises, collapse trust. Yet Andre felt Vernon's deeper manipulation too. Vernon wanted Andre to believe everything depended on him, so Andre would feel guilty for resisting. Vernon excelled at that, turning his control into the greater good, making any defiance look like selfishness and danger. By now Andre could no longer hide behind silence. But he also couldn't allow emotion to drive him. He had to do what he always did best, calculate. Questions formed in his mind, not as excuses, but as survival routes. If he stepped away from the shady activities, would he truly lose everything or only a portion of power? If he stepped away from Donnie, would he truly be saving her or simply handing Vernon control over both their lives? If he resisted, did Vernon really possess enough evidence to crush him, or was this psychological warfare? Andre couldn't verify any of it in that moment, and that uncertainty forced him to act on fear rather than certainty. Andre left the meeting with a strange sensation, not defeat, but the feeling of being pinned against a wall. And when a person is pinned, they either collapse or bite back. Andre didn't yet know which version of himself would emerge. He only knew that the moment Vernon delivered the ultimatum, everything shifted. Andre would no longer be allowed to live comfortably in the gray. He would have to choose black or white, or at least pretend to choose in order to survive. The familiar hallways suddenly felt hostile, as if the walls had absorbed Vernon's words. Andre felt his reputation like glass beginning to crack, and he knew one strike in the right place would shatter it into fragments. He thought of Donnie, of the demand to cut off all personal contact, and his chest tightened as if someone were crushing his lungs. But the moment emotion surged, the word evidence rose again in his mind, bringing the cold image of a career collapsing, of the empire he'd built turning to dust. He was furious at Vernon, and terrified of Vernon, and perhaps most furious at himself for allowing the past we've built to become a noose. Then a detail hit him with new force. Vernon hadn't said, "I will look for proof." Vernon had said, "I have collected proof." Somewhere, a dossier already existed, ready to be opened, ready to become the blade that could cut off every road Andre still had. Andre understood that if he misstepped, Vernon would use it. But if he silently complied, Vernon would treat compliance as confirmation of guilt and tighten the leash even further. The trap was flawless: resist and die, submit and be controlled, retreat and lose Donnie, advance and lose everything. Andre paused, as if he'd reached an invisible crossroads. He knew his next decision would shape not only what Vernon did to him, but what Vernon believed he could do to him forever. Johnny could become Andre's weakness, or she could become the only reason he still fought to stay human. Andre tightened his fists not only from anger at Vernon, but from rage at the reality that he had allowed his history to become weaponized. And just as Andre forced himself to move forward, his phone vibrated in his pocket, soft, brief, like a warning signal. He froze. Because he knew that if the message was connected to Donnie, or connected to what Vernon called evidence, then his next step would no longer be a choice at all. It would be the ignition of a chain reaction no one would be able to stop. Fairmont Crest has always been fluent in velvet wars, conflicts wrapped in manners, where words are sharpened like blades but never allowed to look messy. Where people can smile in a living room and quietly draft each other's downfall in a private office. But after Vernon's harsh warning, the tension shifted into something raw and far more dangerous. As if the walls that once protected the Dupree name had started to tremble under the weight of secrets buried too deep for too long. Andre understood that immediately. He wasn't the kind of man who shook when he was pushed into a corner, because he had survived long enough in a world where existing always came with the threat of being erased. For Andre, intimidation only works on people who still believe they might be spared. He doesn't believe in mercy, and he doesn't believe Vernon will stop once he decides to tighten his grip. That is why, in the moment Vernon issued his ultimatum, most people would expect Andre to bow or be crushed, but Andre stayed unnervingly calm. That calm wasn't recklessness. It was preparation, the kind no one notices until it's too late. Andre received Vernon's warning the way you receive a sudden blast of winter air. He didn't flinch, he didn't dodge, he didn't answer with emotion. Vernon's pressure, instead of weakening him, confirmed something Andre had already suspected: every door to compromise had closed, and it was time to reach for the final weapon. What moved inside Andre wasn't courage in the heroic sense. It was a ruthless calculation, a survival instinct sharpened by years of watching how powerful people destroy each other. Vernon believed he held the power of life and death over Andre's future. Termination, exposure, reputational ruin. Andre saw that clearly. But Andre also understood the deeper truth. Real power belongs to the person who knows exactly what the other man fears most. If Vernon feared the past repeating itself through Bill, if he feared old chaos returning, then his deepest fear was still the Dupree legacy. That legacy wasn't built only on money. It was built on a spotless surface, on stories told the right way, on never allowing anyone to drag the family off its pedestal. Andre had carried a seismic secret for so long that it became a restraint in his own hands. At first, he kept it like insurance, something to protect himself if the worst ever happened. But over time, he realized it wasn't merely insurance. It was a blade suspended above everyone's head. If it ever escaped containment, it wouldn't only cut Vernon, it would tear apart the image of the entire Dupree family in public, turning their moral posturing into a cruel joke. Andre didn't release it sooner because he understood the fallout would spread too widely, creating chaos that no one could fully control, and chaos is rarely useful when you need to stay standing. But Vernon's ultimatum changed the equation. When you're pushed far enough that you have no retreat, you stop protecting stability you never truly owned. Andre had to choose: keep the secret to preserve a polished illusion, or use it to keep Vernon from grinding him into dust. Andre, true to the instincts of someone who survives, chose himself. What makes Andre frightening isn't rage. It's how cold he becomes once he decides to strike back. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to deny, didn't need to beg. He needed only one truth placed in the right position. The secret Andre held was tied to an illegal business deal from Vernon's past, an old stain that had been sealed beneath power, connections, and deliberate silence, possibly purchased with money or secured through fear. Andre wasn't working from rumor. He had gathered persuasive evidence carefully, piece by piece, over time, long enough to make sure that when he finally revealed it, no one could dismiss it as a baseless attack. Those files were kept like a detonator, and Andre waited for the perfect moment, the moment Vernon felt most invincible, the moment he believed Andre was nothing but a trapped pawn. So the confrontation was no longer a one-sided warning. It became a silent overturning of the table, where Andre rewrote the rules by reminding Vernon that he also had something to lose, something bigger than Andre's job, bigger than Andre's reputation. In that suffocating error, Andre exposed shocking details of the illegal deal, each piece landing like a needle breaking Vernon's control. Andre didn't have to dramatize it. He didn't have to decorate it with emotion. The truth, sharp and specific, was enough to make Vernon instantly imagine the headlines, the investigations, the partners who would flee, the rivals who would pounce, and the internal fractures that would split the family from the inside out. Andre understood that danger isn't powerful only when it's guaranteed. It's powerful when someone is forced to live with the knowledge that it can happen at any moment. Vernon's shock wasn't about pride being wounded. It was about realizing Andre wasn't simply threatening his career, Andre was threatening the legacy. A man like Vernon can tolerate internal challenges to authority, but he cannot tolerate the Dupree name being dragged through mud in front of outsiders. He has spent his life constructing an image that this family controls everything, that they are pillars, that they are untouchable. One dirty deal exposed from the past could transform Vernon's lectures about principles into hypocrisy and open the door for enemies who have been waiting for years. Vernon understood that reflexively, and because he understood it, Andre hit him perfectly. In that instant, the balance of power in the room shifted. Not with noise, not with spectacle, but with something heavier. A change in Vernon's gaze, a tightening in his breathing, as if he had swallowed a stone. He knew that if he continued to push Andre, Andre would lose any reason to restrain himself. And if Andre lost that reason, the secret would become fire that could burn the entire Dupree empire down. The pressure forced Vernon into a retreat he never wanted. He conceded in silence, accepting Andre's demand without openly admitting defeat. It wasn't weakness. It was Vernon understanding that if this war went public, the loser wouldn't be just Andre, and it wouldn't be just Vernon. The loser would be the Dupree family itself. And in Vernon's core, family is not simply love. It is an empire that must be defended at any cost, even if the cost is swallowing humiliation. But surrender doesn't create peace. It creates a fracture, deep, sharp, irreversible. When a man like Vernon is forced to step back in front of a man like Andre, no one can pretend the world remains the same. The unity of the Dupree family is threatened not because the secret has leaked to the public, but because it has been spoken aloud between two men who understand exactly how power works. From that moment, Vernon knows Andre holds a noose. Andre knows Vernon will never forget what it felt like to be cornered. The fracture becomes poisonous, quiet but corrosive, spreading through future decisions, future silences, future glances. The Dupree reputation, still untouched by outsiders, has begun to rot from within, liquid eaten by termites while the surface stays polished. Andre walked out with something that looked like victory, yet he felt no relief. This kind of win doesn't feel clean. It feels like gaining one breath while knowing the air is thinning. Andre had forced Vernon to retreat, but he also marked himself permanently. He is now the man willing to break the rules. A man like that might be feared, avoided, even respected, but rarely forgiven. Andre understood that from now on, Vernon would no longer see him as an employee to control, but as a threat to neutralize. The secret Andre used is a double-edged blade. It saved him from being crushed, but it also chained him to constant vigilance, because the moment he loosens his grip, someone will seize it and drive it back into him. That is why Andre didn't pause to celebrate. He moved immediately toward the next phase. Together with Pamela, he began mapping the next move. This was not a victory lap. It was preparation for a second war more ruthless than the first, because now both sides know exactly what the other holds. Andre understands that if he hesitates, Vernon will try to disarm the secret, destroy the evidence, or paint Andre as a liar before Andre can act again. And Andre understands that Pamela is more than a lie. She is an extension of his ambition, someone who can help him move faster in the shadows while keeping the surface deceptively clean. Andre can't afford to be reactive anymore. He crossed the line. Once you use a secret as a weapon, you must keep moving forward or the secret will eventually kill you. There is something about this storyline that chills me, not because it's evil, but because it feels real in the way powerful families often function. When people talk about honor, they aren't always talking about morality, they're talking about image. When they talk about protecting family, they aren't always talking about love, they're talking about empire. In a battle like Vernon versus Andre, it's easy to get trapped in the question of who is right and who is wrong, but the longer you watch, the clearer it becomes that both men are defending what they cannot bear to lose. Vernon is defending legacy, Andre is defending survival. I can't deny a part of me hates Andre for how cold he becomes. Yet another part understands him because I recognize the desperation that erupts when someone is shoved so close to the edge that the only option left is to bite back. And it's hard not to find Vernon terrifying too, because he represents a kind of authority that will crush one person to preserve a spotless surface for an entire dynasty. But Fairmont Crest never allows a victory to last. Once a secret is used as leverage, it stops being a secret, it becomes a shadow on the ceiling, waiting to fall. Andre may have won a round, but the price is that he has admitted, even to himself, that he is capable of burning the Dupree house down if that is what survival demands. And Vernon, even after conceding, will never accept living forever with a blade at his throat. The conflict has entered a new stage, one where silence is not peace but the pause before an explosion. Andre tightens his plans with Pamela, feeling as if he is standing on the edge of something irreversible, and one thought makes my chest feel heavy. If this secret can destroy Vernon, it can destroy Andre too. And the next move Andre and Pamela are preparing may not be about controlling Vernon anymore. It may be about ensuring no one else gets the chance to speak first. The Beyond the Gate CBS Spoilers channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the series from the perspective of a longtime fan. This allows viewers to gain deeper, more objective, and interesting insights. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the series.